begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. After an excellent show of debating from both sides, I feel that it is rather hard to continue the tradition. However, I will try my best and try to prove that proposition side still serves a better future for Africa, for China, for the world's economic powers and the state of the world geopolitics. This will be first time for rebuttals, in which I will show you that the arguments, the entire case that that opposition team has built is wrong. It is based on fallacies. It is based on fallacies that will lead to the devastation of an entire continent, and in fact, an entire people, an entire continent of families, of people awaiting a bright future that may be robbed of them because they believed in a dream that was, in fact, just a mirage, hiding behind it self-interest and greed. So I hear that you speak of a world where you either invest or are invested in. I find this rather disconcerting, that you don't believe a world where Africa can be an autonomous power. Because remember, Africa needs autonomy. It doesn't need world powers. Meddling inside of it with their own self-interests, ruining an entire continent. It needs to develop its own technical expertise, its own education, its own labor force, its own workforce, rather than relying on foreign powers that will come and do nothing but strip it of its resources. Second, I hear that you give many examples of foreign Chinese investment projects within Africa, but I don't hear any proof that these investment projects actually led to an improvement of quality of life for African citizens, or led to any noticeable improvement in economic indicators such as GDP and GDP per capita. So for those reasons, I want to now proceed with something that I found rather funny within your debate, that you speak of Chinese renewable energy investment within Africa. Might I remind the audience, might I remind proposition team and opposition team, that this is China we're talking about, the world's biggest polluter, history's biggest polluter. These renewable projects are just token projects here to hide what China really wants to do within the African continent, which is actually strip it of natural resources using processes that degrade and destroy the environment and wreck our agriculture and any chance that Africa could ever have of developing itself and developing its own minds into independence of Western powers or Eastern powers. Now, with all those rebuttals in mind, I want to present to you our team's other arguments to show you why proposition team presents a better vision for Africa. So first of all, we are against Chinese investment because of the debt dependency that China causes within Africa. This is operating with a few assumptions in mind. First, that large projects cannot be financed through profit alone, but require large loans, the kind of loans that you get from the World Bank, from the International Monetary Fund, or from the Bank of China. Secondly, large projects constitute the majority of Chinese investment projects in Africa. As you've said, these are hydroelectric dams, these are electric grids, these are railways, these are bridges, and these projects cost billions. Third, African nations are more prone to insolvency, aka not being able to pay back their loans due to corruption, poor economic performance, and lack of consumer spending and growth. And fourth, not being able to pay back these loans stretches the thin public budgets of African nations even further. So here's our thesis. Chinese investment in Africa has largely been a negative force because African nations borrow large amounts of money from the Bank of China to finance their projects and are very unlikely to be able to pay back these sums due to various factors that I've explained previously, leading to these nations being trapped in a situation where they are forced to either spend their public budgets on loan repayments, leading to a lack of funding towards other fields, counterintuitively to the goals of Chinese investments, or leasing the projects to the Chinese, effectively losing autonomy over them and any gains seen, or defaulting on their loans and worsening their credit score with international institutions, leading to very high interest rates that may stifle development in case the region ever needs funding in the future. Because China is not, of course, the only power investing into Africa. In contrast, Western nations have historically had very, let's say, stringent relationships with Africa, leading populations to become wary of Western intervention. Therefore, Western investors have had to offer very enticing deals and have had to deal with much more scrutiny to secure partnership with African nations, offering low interest rates and repayment programs, such as the Paris Club, as compared to an emergent actor unknown within the region, like China. As an alternative, instead of falling into a debt trap that may forever stifle local economics through Chinese investments, African nations could invest similar amounts of capital towards nurturing their technical expertise and or attract talents from abroad that will lead similar projects without the trappings of debt. With that in mind, there are other large systemic problems to Chinese investment within Africa that we need to expose. Secondly, there is a lack of transparency and accountability. I will now develop the arguments that my first speaker so well laid out and add with these assumptions in mind that China is a nation which has complete control over its data, leaving international monitoring organizations to guess whether GDP figures and economic indicators are trustworthy. And China does have an incentive to conceal and exaggerate figures to push back against Western criticism. Secondly, in order to pursue a deal effectively, all parties involved must know all of the information in a given project. With that in mind, here is our thesis. Chinese investment into Africa is often wrought with issues of transparency, as the former may not fully disclose information regarding labor requirements, project magnitude, ownership, and repayments. This leads to an asymmetry of information, which means that African nations always get the short end of the stick, as they cannot make decisions, rational decisions,